Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today, we have a great show for you today. We are actually going to be covering all four of the major American sports in today's episode. We're going to start off with football. We're going to talk a little bit about the wide receiver market, talk about some players that have been rumored to be traded, some updates on them, some places that these receivers might end up going if they are to be traded, and some other NFL news that is breaking as the show goes, because we tend to get some news while we're live. We'll follow that up with our fourth installment of the MLB Offseason Files, this time focusing on what a lot of people think, including me, had the best offseason in all of baseball, the Los Angeles Dodgers. I know we're jumping around a little bit, but it'll all make sense. And then the third segment, we're going to do a little bit more hockey coverage. The NHL Trade Deadline is coming up in just about a week from now. We're going to do a little preview on some names to look out for, some major players, teams, and what they might be looking for, and what I think they might trade. And then we'll close out our show with a little bit of NBA talk. We're going to talk about, there was an article put out by ESPN earlier today talking about the explosion of offense around the NBA really in the last 10 years. So we're going to talk about some trends. We're going to talk about what I think, talk about that article a little bit, how we can fix it. It was a really interesting article. We'll go over it. I highly recommend you read it. But yeah, we'll talk about all that stuff. But before we get too far into our show, just a reminder that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are by tuning in, all you need to do is go to streamelements.com/GSMC Sports Network./tip. You leave a tip or donation, going to that link, leave a message with it. It'll scroll across the bottom of that screen. We will have a nice little conversation, you and me, talk about what she said. You want to contribute to the show. We really appreciate it. Again, that link to donate is streamelements.com/GSMC Sports Network./tip. We appreciate you guys for tuning in and for donating. But what do we say? We get right into our first segment, which, as I said, we're talking a little bit about massive wide receiver moves. There's been a lot of news, a lot of rumors, as there always is in the early stages of NFL, at the NFL offseason when it comes to free agencies. And the wide receivers are always a group that gets a lot of attention. Not only because they're a very important position on the field, not only because of how much offense has evolved and how much the passing game matters, and you see bringing in these massive wide receivers can really transform an entire team's outlook on the season, but at the same time, because wide receivers are famously a diva-like position. So there's always a lot of news, always a lot of drama surrounding wide receivers. And it's one of those things that we love. We love it when wide receivers have their little moments. It's a fun thing to cover. But there's been a lot of rumors around a lot of the top receivers in the league this offseason already about them getting traded. Not always from them, a lot of times just from the outside, from just random rumors, and a lot of them have been shut down. We'll talk about all those, some people that might be on the move, and some possible landing spots. But let's start off with a couple players that were in the news for possibly moving, but have come out and said that they're not moving. Obviously, the big name out of that group, or there's a couple big names, but the name that I've been hearing the most is Devante Adams with the Raiders. The Raiders, obviously, are in a weird situation. They have cut their quarterback. They have Aiden O'Connell there, and they're not really in a position to compete for a championship. Obviously, they brought back the interim head coach in Antonio Pierce, former Giants linebacker, and the players love that. But they're kind of in that weird no man's land of sports, where you're not bad enough to compete for the first overall pick, but you're not really good enough to get anything done. You know, you might sneak into a wild card spot, but you're not really good enough to really threaten. They're in that, what I like to call, the Steelers zone. Uh, you are a good team. You could be a good team. You're anywhere from you're just mediocre. This is the Steelers zone, at least in recent years, and that's where the Raiders find themselves. So they can do one of three things, and really any NFL team can do this, but it really is more critical when you're in this zone of mediocrity, this kind of NFL purgatory that the Raiders are in. Uh, so they can do one of three things. They can stand pat, try to compete with the roster they have. I guess it's one of two things. And that's option number one. That seems to be the path that they're taking, and it's the path of least resistance. You're going to win games. Your fans aren't going to be miserable because you're going to be competitive in a lot of games, but you're not really going to push for a Super Bowl. And that's a fine place to be for some teams, that haven't had a lot of success. But if you have had a lot of success and you're back there, it's not the best place to be. But then on the other side of the spectrum, there is blowing it all up. And that is a really, really tough call to make for any front office. You never want to be the front office that blows it up because usually that means your job. A lot of times. Not always, but it takes a lot to survive a rebuild as a head coach, GM, and I know they just got new ones, but it takes a lot to survive a rebuild. So it's really, really risky to do that. And a lot of times it's the right move. In the Raiders' case, they're kind of stuck in the middle of nowhere. Like, they don't have a lot of assets to make this massive move. Now, maybe something happens in the draft where they trade up, but they've come out and they said that they're not trading Devante Adams, which puts them back in that same spot that they were last year with Devante Adams and, an average to bad quarterback, depending on how you feel on Aiden O'Connell. I'm not so high on him. Maybe they go out and they get a veteran guy. Maybe they go out and they draft someone in the second round. They don't seem like a team that's going to draft a quarterback in the first round. The Raiders do. So they're probably going to get that second tier of quarterback. Michael Penix, I really like him. He's probably the top of that second tier. If the Raiders can get him, that might be a nice little fit. But by not moving off of Devante Adams, that's kind of the area that they're signaling in. On the same vein, the Minnesota Vikings have said that they're not moving off of Justin Jefferson. They are also in a similar spot where their quarterback situation is up for question, but the rest of that roster has a lot of really good pieces, has a lot of good stars, a lot of places it can go. Justin Jefferson, obviously, probably the best receiver in the league, but they are most likely not going to re-sign Kirk Cousins. Now, it's not off the question, but they also have a quarterback issue. They're also in that zone of mediocrity. And they're not moving off of him. They could get a haul for him. They're not moving off of him. Now, there's two different situations there. I'm more on the side of blowing it up on the Raiders than I am with the Vikings, because Justin Jefferson is a lot younger than Devante Adams, and I think you have more time to build around him. Devante Adams' contract is expiring soon for the Raiders. I'm not exactly sure. I don't have that number in front of me, but I know it's expiring soon, and it doesn't seem like a place with a lot of optimism. The Vikings, on the other end, they seem like a team with some more optimism around them. They seem closer to competing than the Raiders are. But, I could be very wrong about all of that. So that's the news for them. A.J. Brown, there was some news around him asking for a trade. He personally has come out and said that he is not going to ask for a trade. And that's a good thing. The Eagles need him. They had a really down year in the down second half. They kind of collapsed. But keeping A.J. Brown happy and keeping him there is going to be so important if they want to continue to be if they want to rebound after a tough offseason so far. I mean, they lost kind of a core member of them, Jason Kelce, as a leader in the locker room and on the field. Now they have Cam Jurgens to replace him, so it's not impossible. But if they were to lose A.J. Brown as well, that would really set them back a couple years. And I think they can bounce back from last season. They're still a very good, very talented team, but there's a lot of things that could go wrong with the Eagles. So holding on to A.J. Brown is a huge deal. And then the other big name that has been talked about for being traded and being traded all offseason, we touched on this a little bit, I think about a week and a half ago, Brandon Ayuk. He is in an interesting situation with the 49ers, and so are the 49ers with him, where he is not up for contract this season, but he is up for a contract next season. And he's asking for a lot of money. He had a nice breakout season this year. The 49ers don't have the cap space to pay him, and he could be really valuable on a lot of teams. There's a lot of people that are saying the Panthers should trade for him and make him the number one over there. He's a nice piece to have. He's young. He does a lot for the run game. That's one of the things that all those 49ers receivers do. They buy into the culture. They're really good, even if they aren't getting thrown the ball. They're good at they're really good teammates, making sure that the run is working so that they can get the ball because they trust in that culture, in that offense. The Jets were rumored to trade for Devante Adams. Brandon Ayuk to the Jets again could provide a nice little piece next to Garrett Wilson for Aaron Rodgers to throw to. Because as good as he is, we saw what the Jets' offense was, and I know they didn't have a quarterback, but adding a piece like Brandon Ayuk for a little cheaper would be a nice piece. And obviously, there's two other teams. The Patriots don't have any weapons, but I don't think they're really in the market to trade for a wide receiver right now. If they were going to trade for a receiver, trading for Ayuk would signal them drafting a quarterback in the draft. If they don't, they're most likely going to draft Marvin Harrison Jr. Or who knows, maybe they double dip on wide receiver and sign a free agent like a Kirk Cousins out there. But there's a lot of moves. And then the last major piece of wide receiver news that's been coming out so far. We talked about T. Higgins already getting franchise tagged. There was a report that came out yesterday, I believe, that said if the Bengals were to trade him, they were looking at a first-round pick in compensation from a lot of people. And getting that for a wide receiver in T. Higgins, who really could be a wide receiver one in almost any other offense in the league that isn't the Cincinnati Bengals, aside next to Jamar Chase, obviously. It really poses the question, if you were the Cincinnati GM, obviously you want to put your team in the best scenario to win. Does trading T. Higgins for a first-round pick make sense? Who are you going to get? It's probably going to be an end of the first round type pick for him. But does it make sense to move off of him for a first? I personally would not make that move, and it doesn't seem like the Bengals are really going to make that move either. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because that's a report that I heard. Obviously, it doesn't seem like he's going to get traded, but if you were in the shoes and you heard you could get a first-round pick, let's say it's a pick from anywhere from 20 to 32, back half of the first-round pick, would you do it? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments. But yeah, in our next segment, we are going to transition away from football, move into a little bit of baseball talk, continue our series on the offseason files, this time for the Los Angeles Dodgers and their massive offseason. Stick around. We'll be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around, I feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows with 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits some losing shit. A stupid myth, you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh,
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for sitting through that break. If you are just tuning in, we just finished talking a little bit of the wide receiver trade market. Some news that's been coming out of that surrounding Justin Jefferson, Devante Adams, A.J. Brown, and Brandon Ayuk, along with some teams that might trade for it. Coming up in this segment, we are going to be continuing our coverage of the MLB offseason. This time we'll be focusing on the Los Angeles Dodgers and their massive offseason. And later on down the line, we're going to be talking a little bit about some NHL trade deadline previews coming up in just about a week from now, and talking about an article from ESPN talking about the explosion of scoring in the NBA. So stick around for that stuff. But before we get into the Dodgers, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you are right now, all you need to do is go to streamelements.com/GSMC Sports Network./tip. Leave a note with your donation or tip. It'll scroll across the bottom of the screen. We'll have a little conversation about it, and you can be famous for a moment. We'll have a little chat for everyone to see, and you'll be an even bigger part of the show than you are right now. Again, that link to leave a tip or donation is streamelements.com/GSMC Sports Network./tip. We appreciate anything you give, and we appreciate you just for tuning in and watching. But like I said, this segment, we are going to be covering our fourth episode out of 30 of the MLB offseason files, this time focusing on the Los Angeles Dodgers, a team that had, by all accounts, one of the greatest offseasons of all time. And I feel very confident in saying that because it's not a lot of times that you get one of the greatest players in the history of baseball, in their prime, in an offseason. You can probably count on one hand how many times a guy like that has even hit free agency. Usually those guys are locked up, they're not going anywhere, or they're traded, you're getting some kind of compensation for it. You don't ever see players as good as Shohei Ohtani hit the open market. And we saw why. That man, Shohei Ohtani, got paid the biggest contract in American sports history. $700 million. I can repeat that for people in the back, because when I saw this contract for the first time, I was eating food. I legitimately almost did a spit take. I almost spit out my food. It was the most guttural reaction to a contract that I have ever had. $700 million for Shohei Ohtani. And you know what the crazy part about that is? Do you know what the even crazier part about Shohei Ohtani getting $700 million is? It's that he might be worth even more. $700 million might be an underpayment for Shohei Ohtani. A guy that is in Cy Young conversation every single year when he stays healthy on the mound. A guy that is in MVP conversations for what he does with his bat. League leading in home runs a couple years ago. He's up there in average. He's going for the batting crown and the pitching crown every single year. A player like that is insane. It is once in not just a generation, once in a lifetime. we talk about these generational players all the time, and there are generational players. You have guys like Mike Trout. You have guys like Bryce Harper. These are generational players. Shohei Ohtani is a once-in-a-lifetime player. He is once-in-a-millennia player. The last time we saw anyone do anything close to what Shohei Ohtani is doing was Babe Ruth. And he was not nearly as dominant on the mound as Shohei Ohtani was. You talk about a guy like him, adding him in the offseason. First of all, that automatically makes you win the offseason. But it also puts you in contention for one of the greatest offseasons of all time. And it wasn't even everything they did. You'd think any team writing a check for $700 million would say, all right, it's a lot of money. I think we landed the biggest fish, one of the biggest fishes of all time, and we're going to settle down. We're gonna take a break. We added one of the greatest players of all time to our roster that was already stacked. But no, the Dodgers did not do that. The Dodgers, a team with seemingly unlimited money, went out and they got the big fish of the international market in Yamamoto from Japan. The pitcher that everyone is already hyping up as another generational pitcher. We've seen what he has been able to do over in Japan, over in the World Baseball Classic. He is a nasty pitcher. Now, he hasn't pitched in the MLB yet, but we've seen him go up against elite competition before, and it is incredible to watch. They got him, they got Shohei, and I think Shohei was a real big reason why they ended up getting him, as opposed to him going to a team like the Yankees that were really heavily pursuing him. And on top of that, they add one of the elite pitchers in the league already in Tyler Glasnow from the Rays. Now, he was injured most of last season, but when he is on, he is, again, another guy in conversation for Cy Young. And then they brought back Clayton Kershaw as well. So they shored up their biggest weakness, which was the pitching staff. Shohei Ohtani will not be pitching this season. He's still recovering from an injury, but it doesn't matter. You know, Shohei Ohtani with not even being on the mound might be worth $700 million on his own. You add that to a lineup that consists of Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, and it's terrifying. That team is a team that constantly, every year, wins 100-plus games. They haven't had that postseason success that you look for with a team like that, but baseball is a sport where it's really, really hard to win. And very rarely do you, in baseball or in a lot of other sports, do you see the team that wins the most games win at all. You know, there's a good chance in a lot of sports. Baseball is the one where you see it happen the least. The Dodgers are the title favorites this season, and I expect them to be title favorites almost every year that they have Shohei Ohtani, because they are so good. That lineup is one of the scariest lineups that you can possibly imagine. And you pair that with a pitching staff with 3 elite arms, albeit some arms that are getting a little older in Clayton Kershaw and Tyler Glasnow. So maybe not this year. This year might be a year that it takes 1 year for everything to go smoothly. Maybe not a whole year, but a couple months. I wouldn't be surprised if the Dodgers started a little slow. Maybe the first week they're a little bit slow. But 3 at-bats into spring training, Shohei Ohtani is already hitting bombs. So I'm not too worried about them. Now, that pitching staff for this 2024 season is going to be a little lackluster. Like I said, Shohei Ohtani will not be pitching this season. He's still recovering from his injury from last year that shut him down near the end. So he will not be pitching this season. But his team is good enough that I expect them to win their division, compete for the 1 seed in the NL, and they should still be World Series leaders in the odds. They are that good of a team. They have been one of the most successful teams in not just baseball, but out of every American sport in the last decade. You go by win percentage, I believe they are top 3. I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, I'd have to double check that. But the Dodgers are stacked, and it kind of is unfair. I kind of feel bad. Now, we know how baseball works. All my baseball fans out there, we know that it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter how many stars you have. You know, you look at the Padres last season, you look at them on paper, that team was stacked. They didn't get along. The Dodgers have never really had that kind of culture issue. And culture is very important in baseball. So as long as they can gel, as long as they aren't at each other's throats like a team like the Padres were in the last couple seasons, they're going to be really good. They're World Series contenders. They're probably title favorites. I am scared to think about how good this team could be. Now, Shohei Ohtani has never been to the playoffs. For as good as he is, he's never been to the playoffs. And this goes back to the Angels' failure as an organization. We also talked about this a little bit. You have Mike Trout, who's only been to one playoff game. You have Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani on the same team, and they never go to the playoffs. It's incompetence at the highest level to waste generational, lifetime talents like that on the same team at the same time. But this is not about the Angels. The Dodgers have made the playoffs. I expect them to continue to make the playoffs. Shohei Ohtani does not have that playoff experience. I'm not too worried about him. He has shown he can do it in the biggest moments. You talk about the World Baseball Classic last season. He came in the ninth inning, faced his teammate Mike Trout, struck him out with 3 fastballs at 100 miles an hour right down the middle. You know, he might not have the experience in the MLB of these big moments, but he has shown that he has the ability to handle them. And I'm not too worried about this Dodgers team. In fact, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone that's worried about this Dodgers team. This Dodgers team is that good. They are that talented. And my hot take is that they might, not this year, but next year, they might be competing for the best record in baseball history. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Los Angeles Dodgers. I expect them to at least make the NLCS, the championship series, if not the World Series, and we'll see what happens there. Like I said, I don't think they'll win the World Series this year. There's just too many factors. Something crazy will happen. But you look out next year, I think they'll win like 2 or 3 in a row. And I am dead serious about that. This team is that good. So, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Los Angeles Dodgers, their offseason. What do you expect the Shohei Ohtani Dodgers to be able to accomplish, not just this season, but in the future? Stick around for the next segment. We're going to be moving off of baseball, talking about the upcoming NHL Trade Deadline. That's in about a week. We'll talk about some major players, some moves that we expect to happen, some moves that you never know, and some teams that need to make some moves, the buyers and the sellers. And then in our final segment, we're going to move into the NBA. We're going to talk about an article that came out today talking about the explosion of scoring in the NBA. So stick around for that. We're going to go on a break, be back in just about a minute. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for sitting through that break. If you are just tuning in for the first time, in our first segment, we talked about some wide receiver markets. We talked about some wide receivers that may or may not get traded, some news surrounding some of the stars. And in our second segment, we just finished our fourth episode of the MLB Offseason Files, this time covering the Los Angeles Dodgers. But in this segment, we are going to be moving off of those two sports, talking about the NHL Trade Deadline. The NHL Trade Deadline that is coming up on us really quickly. The deadline is just about a week from now on March 8th. We're going to do a little preview today. We're going to do a little preview. We're going to talk about some players to watch that might be on the move. We are going to cover some teams that might be major players in there, and some names to watch for the deadline. But before we get too far into this segment, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of this show than you already are, all you need to do is go to streamelements.com/GSMC Sports Network./tip. You can leave a tip along with a comment. It'll scroll across the bottom of the screen. We'll have a little conversation. You'll become an even bigger part of the show, not just for me, but for everyone to see. We appreciate you leaving anything or really just watching. Again, that link to leave a tip or donation is streamelements.com/GSMC Sports Network./tip. We appreciate anything you can give. But, like I said, let's get right into this segment. As I was doing in my little preview here, we are covering the NHL Trade Deadline. A little preview of the deadline that's coming up in just about a week from now on March 8th. There's a couple big players, big moves that might be made. There were a bunch of executives that expect, or one NHL agent that says he expects this trade deadline to be insane. Now, on the other hand, there's a team executive that said it doesn't feel like there's a lot out there. You never know. But that's how it is with every trade deadline. It could be crazy, it could be boring, it could pass by with nothing. But there's a couple big players that I'm keeping an eye on personally to see if they're going to make a move. And one that I wanted to start off talking about is the New Jersey Devils. The New Jersey Devils are a team that last season kind of had a breakout year. They kind of were that surprise team. You know how every year in every sport, there's going to be that one surprise team that comes out of nowhere, maybe a year early or a couple years before people expect them to be ready to compete. The Jersey Devils were that team last year. Everything kind of clicked for them, and they made a nice run in the playoffs, all the way to I think the second round, maybe the third round. I don't remember. Honestly, I apologize for that. My NHL history is jumbling through my mind right now. But they won a playoff series or two. So they were looking at being a contender again this season, and it has not gone quite to plan. They are the outside looking in the Eastern Conference. They don't have a more than 50% chance of making the playoffs, and it's because their goaltending has already fallen apart. We talk about a team like the Devils, and this always has been their weakness, their goaltending. They never had this elite goaltending, even last season. They had guys that were doing it. They had guys that were coming across and getting it. They had guys that were getting the job done in Vitek Vanacek, who is going to make the easy saves, but he's not there to make the tough saves. On the other hand, we have teams like the Lightning that won a bunch of cups in a row, and they have these elite goalies. So that's been the main target for the New Jersey Devils, has been a goalie. And a name that me personally, I have been wanting them to go out and get is John Gibson from the Ducks. It's going to take a lot. He is on a huge contract over there, but it's got term. Which he's got, I believe, 3 years left after this season. It is a big contract. There'd have to be a lot given up to get him. But a name that has been circling, other than John Gibson, has been Markstrom. He is the goaltender for the Flames. He has had a pretty solid season. He got injured for a little bit of it. But looking at a guy like him, Jacob Markstrom has, by a lot of numbers, been a lot of high analytics numbers, been the second best goalie in the league behind Connor Hellebuck. You look at a guy who had a down season last year, but the year before that was in Vezina trophies or best goalie conversations. You look at a team in the Flames that's kind of teetering on the edge. We talked about the Raiders being in that mediocrity. They're teetering on the edge. They lost a lot of their stars from when they made that playoff run. So they're teetering on the edge of being a good team and competing or blowing it up. So a lot of this trade deadline kind of hinges on what the Flames are going to do. They have a couple players, not just Markstrom, that might get traded. Tanev and Hanifin, both guys that are on the trade block or the theoretical trade block as well. So we're looking at a trade between the Flames and the Devils for Jacob Markstrom, something that almost happened a couple years ago. It ended up falling through. I believe no one knows exactly what the Flames were asking for, but the belief is that it was too high. What they were asking for was just a little too much, for a little too expensive for the Devils' blood. So they moved on. They didn't end up getting him. But now we look at a team like the Devils that is on that edge outside looking into the playoffs. They need to make that big move if they think they're going to make the playoffs, because they keep things as they are now, they aren't going to make the playoffs. So we are looking at them to either trade for Jacob Markstrom or John Gibson. Both of those guys, now John Gibson is a little older, both of them are a little older at this point. But you go out and you add them to your team. They both are kind of they're both really solid when they're on. Now, they're both prone to bad games, but it's an upgrade in net from what they have. And it's not just a small upgrade, it's a major upgrade. And it's something that, as a fan of hockey, I've been wanting the Devils to get for a while, another goalie. It'd be interesting to see if it happens. I don't know if it will, honestly. I think it's going to take a lot to get Jacob Markstrom, and I think it's going to take a lot to get John Gibson simply because of how big that contract is. Someone's going to have to eat a lot of salary, and if it's going to be the Ducks, then you're going to have to give up a lot to get him, because it is a lot of money to pay a guy not on your team. So it is going to be tough, but if they can get that, I think they can make a push for the playoffs. And if you can get a guy like John Gibson who has term left on him, you might be able to, not just for this year, but next year, make a couple deep runs. The other big story, the other team that I'm looking at, the big team that I'm looking at to make a move, is going to be the Edmonton Oilers. The Oilers started off the season as one of the worst teams in the league. They fired their head coach, and then they went on the tied longest win streak in NHL history. I believe it was 18 or 17 games, and that went through January and February. Got snapped just a little while ago, but now they're comfortably in the playoffs. You have a guy like Connor McDavid, who we talked about is one of the greatest players, again, of all time in the league. He is a special talent. It's hard to describe just how good he is on the ice. If you have to watch him, what he does is so special. Everything he does is so special on the ice. So we're looking at that. We're looking at building around him. If you are the Oilers, you need to, and they might be one of the hotter teams in hockey right now. But in the playoffs, what really matters, I mean, it's a different game. You know, in every sport, the playoffs is a different game than the regular season. And in the NHL, aside from goaltending, the biggest obstacle to succeeding in the playoffs is depth scoring. You can win a lot of games with a great top line, a great top six. You look at the Washington Capitals. They for all those years with Alex Ovechkin and Nicholas Backstrom, they could never break through. You look at a team like the Maple Leafs, who can still never break through with a guy like Auston Matthews. They never had the depth scoring. Now the one year that the Caps won, they had really good depth. So depth is a huge factor in the NHL playoffs. So you go take a look at these guys. There's some people out there. Jordan Eberle, again, some depth scoring, some depth forwards is what we're targeting. Max Pacioretty from the Caps, a guy who hasn't played that much, but has the ability to be a really, really nice bottom six winger, providing some offense. And then Kubiak as well. There's some people out there on expiring contracts, on teams that might be selling, that can really provide a nice little piece off the bench for depth scoring. You talk about, again, depth is one of the most important things in hockey. And we talked about the Flames. They have a lot of guys over there. Executives believe that they're the key. They're going to control the speed of this deadline. They're going to be the one that makes the first domino fall, whether it be Jacob Markstrom or whether it be like last year with Elias Lindholm, or whether it be Tanev or Hanifin. The Flames seem like they're in the middle of all of these, and they are seemingly the hinge that's going to open up the door to what might be a crazy trade deadline in the NHL. Like I said, we have a lot of time. We're going to keep an eye on this. The trade deadline is on March 8th. There's a lot of time to make these big runs, to decide if you are a seller or a buyer at the deadline. There's still time for these teams like the Devils, like the Flames, to decide that, depending on how this next week or so goes. So, in our next segment, we are going to move into the NBA. There's an article on ESPN talking about the explosion of scoring and what that meant for the league, what these players think, if it's a good or a bad thing. I'll give you my thoughts. We'll go through that article a little bit together. But stick around. I appreciate everybody so much for tuning in. We will be right back. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking with me through that break. If you are just tuning in for the first time, you missed a pretty good show. We started off our show in segment 1 talking about some major wide receiver news in the NFL, who may or may not get traded, some major news surrounding Justin Jefferson, Brandon Ayuk, A.J. Brown, and some other major wide receivers there. In our second segment, we covered the fourth part of the MLB offseason files, this time talking about the Los Angeles Dodgers and their incredible offseason, what we think will be going on with them in 2024. And we just finished talking about the preview for the NHL trade deadline that is coming up on March 8th. Again, we got about a week until that. We'll keep an eye on all that stuff, and I will keep you personally updated with any major breaking news on that. But in this segment, we're going to be talking about an article on ESPN, talking about by Tim Bontemps and Kevin Pelton, talking about the explosion of scoring in the NBA, the massive increase that we've seen in the last 10 years or so, in not just the good teams, but in almost every team. But before we get too far into this segment, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of this show, all you need to do is go to streamelements.com/GSMC Sports Network./tip. You can leave a message with your donation. It'll scroll across the bottom of the screen right there, just for everyone to see. We'll have a little conversation about that, and we appreciate anything you can give. Again, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you are right now, all you need to do is go to streamelements.com/GSMC Sports Network./tip. We appreciate everybody so much for tuning in and for donating. But without further ado, like I said, let's get into this segment. Does the NBA have a scoring problem? This article talks about how this is the first time this season that 4 players scored more than 60 points in a span of 4 days. And it wasn't just that they did it on 4 separate days. They did it 2 times on 2 days, with Joel Embiid and Karl Anthony Towns scoring 70 and 62 respectively on one day, and then just 4 days later, Luka Doncic and Devin Booker scoring 73 and 62 respectively. We saw that All-Star game where the East put up 200 points, put up over 200 points for the first time, and it caused a lot of people not just to question the All-Star game, but it shows a trend of the increase of scoring, the explosion of scoring, as I keep saying. People are talking about it. We go back about 15, 20 years, the average scoring was a lot less. It's hard to hold teams under 100 now, but you go back about 20 years and that was the norm. You're seeing games and 89 to 97. You're seeing games, high-scoring games back then being 110 to 105. These were super high-scoring games back then, and now that's a low-scoring game in the NBA. There's a nice little chart that was put together by K Pelton Charts on Instagram. It's in this article, and it shows that since 2012, in almost every year, the points per 100 possession for the entire league has gone up. Now, it took a short dip in 2015, 2018, and 2021, it looks like, but it still is almost an exponential increase. If you look at this graph, it's gone up almost 10 points per 100 possessions in the last 10 years. And there's a lot of reasons for why this might be happening. Obviously, the biggest one, and the one that people start to talk about if you're not paying attention to the NBA that much, is, do people just not try on defense? And that clearly isn't the case. There are clearly players that are trying their best on defense. These players are working their hardest. They are doing their best, but defense has become so much harder in the league. You hear people talk about back in the day how it was so much more physical and you couldn't get inside and defenses were better, which is why the scoring was less. But as much as that might be the case, I wasn't around to watch them, it was easier, in my opinion, to defend because you didn't have these guys like Steph Curry or Damian Lillard or Trae Young that you had to defend at half court. You didn't have guys like Victor Wembanyama or Chet Holmgren that are 7 feet tall and can stretch the floor the way that they do by shooting and passing, or Nikola Jokic is another great example of that. You didn't have these guys back in the day. You had dominant inside presences like Shaq. You didn't have these incredible shooters. You didn't have the amount of space that you have to cover as a defense back then. There was a stat that the average offense has had to guard 5 feet more of space. That's 5 feet more space for the offense to get open. That's 5 feet more of space, 5 feet more space for offenses to get that open man, to get those soft areas in the zone or beat their man, because the defense is so spread out. It's so much harder to go and help on defense. It's so much harder, to get these numbers on defense that you're getting. People aren't driving inside as much, and it's a lot cleaner in the lane. You used to be able to stack the lane a little bit, put not just one guy, but 2, maybe even 3 if you were pushing it, and kind of make that lane a nightmare to drive through. But with this spacing, with the amount of spacing that these shooters are giving teams and how everybody on the court can shoot now, it makes it so much harder. It makes it so much easier, not just to get into the lane, but to navigate inside the lane. There's so much more space for inside passes. There's so much more space to dribble around people. There used to be no space. There used to be nothing like that. And that, I think, is the biggest reason for points rising. People are making more shots. People are, really, they're just getting better at shooting. They're getting better at shooting from further, which is contributing to more space. You can make anything from anywhere. It's really, really, really hard to defend in the NBA right now. But one of the other reasons is free throws. Not only are people getting better, like I said, at shooting, so they're getting better at shooting free throws, but they're shooting more free throws than they were in the past. People talk about how physical it was, and it's not that it was any less physical, it's that, or I guess it was more physical, but that's because they were able to get away with it. You go and look at playoff games, and there was this really cool chart that I was looking at that shows in the playoffs all these offensive numbers go down. It was a chart that was going from 1978 to 2022, and it showed in every single offensive category, whether that be points, whether that be offensive efficiency, these advanced analytics as well, they go down in the playoffs. And I'm trying to figure out the reason why. One of those reasons why is that the players say, that Drew Holiday says, is because the way that it's reffed. You're not getting as many free throws. You're able to get away with a little more in the playoffs. They let you play. They have, they let you have a little more leeway in the NBA. And it's not necessarily a bad thing that scoring's gone up, right? Sometimes that leads to some super entertaining results. But on the other end, sometimes it seems like it's impossible for the defense, and it's just a shooting contest. And it's not always like that, In tight games, when it's 150 to 149, we love those. But when it's blowouts 150 to 103, then it feels a little excessive. And that's always how it feels in a blowout. But I'm curious if it might not feel that way if it was 100 to 70, That's the big thing. I am all for scoring. I really am. And I don't think there's an easy fix to this. I don't think there's do this and the scoring will go down. There's a lot of theories out there that I've heard that expanding the league might, spread the talent out more, lead to less scoring. And we've seen something like that happen when the last time they expanded the league, the scoring took a big hit, and then it's slowly climbed up since then. So that might be something you can do, not only to decrease the scoring if the scoring really is a problem, which I think it isn't yet, but if it continues on the way that it is, you're going to start seeing 200-point games by teams in the next 10 years if nothing changes. And that is going to get a little ridiculous. But you look at some scoring, you look at teams that are, I lost my train of thought. You look at expanding. That not only is good for this scoring problem that is starting to develop here in the NBA, but it also, we've talked about this before with the other issues with the NBA, players resting. It's good for the business, because the NBA, the big solution for the big problem with regular season games in the NBA is to play less games. And as a business, you're never going to do that. But expanding, not only might that help this issue, but it's something that's in the purview of the NBA. It's going to benefit them. It's going to make them more money. So that is what I think is the best solution to solve this. Not only would it give us more teams, more excitement, more money for the NBA, but it would probably decrease scoring because talent would be more spread out again. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this. I'll put the link to that article in the description of this video and of the clip here, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on solutions. If you think it's an issue, what you would like to see done, let me know. But thank you everybody so much for tuning in to today's episode of Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I have been your host, Jeremy Lapidus. I appreciate everybody listening, tuning in, participating in the show. I will see you tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.